Hello, welcome to Parallel Worlds. I'm Jeremy Finestone, one of your new co-hosts for this show, alongside JD Oliva of Brace for Impact. Today, JD, how are you?
Great, man.
Good, great. Jeff Hawkins is also with us, he of the Dynamite Show with Paul Fontaine. Jeff, how are you today?
Oh, killing it.
Excellent. We are a new podcast discussing adjacent topics related to wrestling, such pop culture, comic books, other media that people have interest in adjacent to the wrestling world and would like to talk about it. And today, unfortunately, is a somber topic. It is the passing of one of the legendary creators in all of comics, George Perez, an artist, writer, editor, and general creator of all things comic books. He was born in 1954 and he passed away at 67 years old. And so we are here to celebrate, do a memoriam and a retrospective of how he affected us and his career in general. So, Jeff, can you go ahead and give me a background on what George Perez, how you were first introduced to George Perez?
I was first introduced to George Perez because my dad saw me taking an interest in comic books, and he was traveling for work at the time. And so he picked me up 2 comic books on his trips. Guy at the store says these are going to be a big deal in terms of, you know, a comic book or whatever. They were Crisis 1 and 2. Crisis on Infinite Earths 1 and 2. And I had followed, like, I liked Super Friends. I liked Challenge of the Super Friends. It was one of those things. When I'd go to a relative's house, they'd have some comic books, but I wasn't, an in-depth comic book guy then. But Perez and his art, this is going to sound weird. If somebody asked me how I could, narrow down the work of George Perez as an artist and one thing, it's the shocked face or the look of concern. No, to me, nobody ever drew that kind of level of concern and dread and shock. Although he used the shock face a little too much sometimes, but and then there's just like a starburst behind the face and stuff like that. But Perez, Crisis for me, I know that they've absolutely undone everything they did in the Crisis. It was such a monumental thing to try and get every DC comic character in the book, in addition to then introducing the Charlton heroes, which they had just picked up then. But there are moments in there that are truly moving, and it's mostly due to George Perez's art. The death of Supergirl, where they said we had a casualty, and you just see her dying there, bleeding and things like that, and just everybody's sad, grimaced face there. Just even from the introduction in Crisis 1, where Earth 3 is getting destroyed, and it's the crime syndicate trying to be heroes in their last dying moments, and them even realizing the irony of this, and you can see it in their faces almost, where it's just like, I can't believe we're doing this right now. But this is how we're going out. And the way that he drew character deaths to me, because Crisis at that time was still a time when you had stakes, and it was if you killed somebody, they stayed dead. And it was serious business. And, you're watching people from various teams getting slaughtered and basically all it was it's a timeline cleanup, really. If you think about it, Crisis is nothing but trying to clean up the Golden Age with the Silver Age and get that. But the level of depth of Perez's art for me is what really, really made that comic so special. And that's what I think about. And then, eventually I'd go back, and especially like on the Titans run, and him and Wolfman on Titans, along with Claremont's X-Men run, where he's doing like things about racism, but it's cloaked in mutants. Teen Titans had more depth than any comic had a right to be, concerning depression and drug use and things like that. And Perez's art really brought out the struggles of all of those characters in there. And that, for me, is what got me into Perez. And then, you know, later I'd read his Avengers, and his Wonder Woman stuff was really good, but it wasn't for me because I'm just not into mythology and gods and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But Perez always had, there's always that certain level of dread when something bad is happening in Perez's characters' faces. And you can tell a George Perez drawn comic because there's usually someone who's very, very worried in it. But that's, you know, so basically too long didn't read. Perez got me hooked on comics originally.
That's quite the story. I mean, I remember reading Crisis the first time and just remembering just how magical, just feeling the grand scale of an artist being able to navigate hundreds of characters in a book in 1985, which was simply you couldn't even comprehend it until it was actually happening. JD, same question to you. What was the impact of George Perez for you, and where did you first come across him?
So I'm a little bit younger. My experience with Perez really starts in Infinity Gauntlet, because I become a fan like late 90s when I start reading comics, and at that point it's all about Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, and it's those Image superstars.
Rob Liefeld,
yeah, those are the guys that everyone's talking about, and I'm 10, so I'm like perfectly zeroed into that. And I remember I'm at the grocery store with my mom, and I'm buying comics everywhere I can get them, and the cover for Infinity Gauntlet #1 grabs me, and like I couldn't let go. Like I ran to it. I never vividly, and I grabbed this. And again, this is striking dark cover, which is different than a lot of the stuff Perez would normally do. But it's the 90s, so I mean, like we're immediately steering into like dark. And I get the book, and this is my first time ever reading Cosmic Marvel anything. Right? I'm an X-Men guy at this point, and I'm a very new X-Men guy. So it's all of these different characters, right? It's this Infinity Gauntlet 1. It's very similar to the Infinity War movie that would come out recently, right? It's this big, you know, overview of the Marvel universe, and this thing is happening where people are just disappearing. So you get a nice little you know, snippets into everybody. And even as a kid, I'm looking at this going, this looks different than everything else that's being drawn right now. It's, I don't want to say more subtle, but it's just different. It's not as like bombastic as what Jim Lee and what like Rob Liefeld were doing. Like there's this, now I can look back and say there's a confidence in his art that's not like crazy, right? But he's so good at like, and later I discovered how good he was at balancing these massive casts, which is why he was perfect for something like Infinity Gauntlet. And that's what it is. It's this massive cast and this big problem that's this universe destroying monster that's coming. And like, there's just so much going on. And for someone who was really young into his fandom, it struck me, and I had the poster on my wall for about 4 or 5 years as a teenager because I love that cover. And I remember reading the series as it went along, and I think Perez gets sick or something like that in the middle of it, and Ron Lim has to finish it. And I like Ron Lim; he's a good artist, but he's not George Perez, right? So the end of Infinity Gauntlet doesn't have the epic flavor that the first issue has. And then, you know, you go back and I discover that George Perez, what those guys, the Image guys were in the 90s, George Perez was that in the decade before. He was the superstar. He was the biggest name in comics as far as art went. Him and like John Byrne. But again, I'm young, I'm 10. I don't know that at the time. I'm like, this George Perez guy is great. You know? So that was my first like wading into the waters of what this guy was. And then of course you go back and you read the Titans and you read his Avengers stuff, and it's just, he's just so much of what he did defined comics for that period of time. And it's such a shame, man.
I really like what you both said about the ability to draw numerous characters like on a page or whatever. Like for me, like if you look at the Crisis covers, like Crisis 5, where it's all the characters, but with split faces from Earth 1 and Earth 2. And you can tell that each is different. And it's, that one is great. And then Crisis 9 is one of my favorite covers ever, where the bad guys are getting involved. And you can put some meat on. Yeah, I love that cover. It's one of my, if I could get that in a poster, I would. And I'm thinking about just paying somebody to do it because it's just such a great cover, and it almost gets the entire cast in there at times in terms of who was being used at the time in DC.
That is a 12-issue series, right? That he's doing all the interiors on. He's doing the covers of it, and they're so much of it.
Yeah.
And he's doing it in time. Like he's hitting deadlines. Like it's not like this thing took years and years to produce. It was a 1-year storyline.
And he's using all the characters from like
Yes.
the wartime comics, like the Haunted Tank and the
Yes.
Losers are coming out here. And it's just like he has a grip on everybody here.
I'm
From
relatively
every
certain he only missed a month deadline in that entire year.
That's incredible.
It is a feat that most people cannot repeat, and he actually wasn't able to repeat it later on in his career, and it affected his career, and we'll cover that later on.
Was he the one that messed up DC Challenge for everybody and got that off schedule? Because that would be irony right there.
I don't believe so, but
Okay.
we could blame him anyways. So for me, the real first time that I truly paid attention to George Perez's creative outlet was the return of the Avengers after Heroes Were Born, where Kurt Busiek and George Perez came together. I had issues here or there, but that's where everything kind of clicked, and I understood like this was a guy that was something special, and there was not going to be another person like this because of the way the comic industry was and the way that the comic industry was changing. There wasn't going to be allowed to be a person that could have this level of reign over the comic community. But for a guy like George Perez, he handled that responsibility so well. He was beloved by everybody. You cannot go online and find a bad word to be said about George Perez. So I figure, why don't we go through what he did to be so beloved? In 1973, he got his first job as Rich Buckler's assistant at Marvel. And in 1975, he got his first job drawing the Avengers. He then went on for the Avengers for 5 years, 1975 to 1980, until DC poached him for the JLA. Right. He went on and worked the JLA until issue 200, when he then went on to do the New Teen Titans. The New Teen Titans is one of those books that he is fondly remembered for, along with Marv Wolfman. This was a book that featured Robin, Aqualad, Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, Cyborg, Starfire, and Raven, and Beast Boy.
Yeah.
Changeling. This book, as Jeff mentioned, introduced several adult themes for teenage readers and matured the line of comics in a way that made it feel more relevant and adult to a burgeoning audience. Jeff, you talked about how Titans, what it meant to you. Do you have anything more that you wanted to add to that?
The characters in that run that he created, I mean, Slade the Terminator. Enough said. Just it's politically incorrect to say now in some ways, but Starfire was just pure sex the entire time. I mean, and that's pretty much what just
she and Robin, that's all they wanted to do.
T&A the entire time, and you're just like, my God, what am I reading here all the time? But it dealt with it in a comedic way, and sometimes it's still very funny where it's like, well, she's playing the Spock character from Trek, where it comes down on her. I don't understand these customs. My people are just naked all the time and sleep with each other. It's just like, okay.
That's cool.
The Wonder Girl relationship and just how that was drawn and everything, it made them come off much older than they were, to be honest with you. But it's one of those things where it's like, you almost view it as a May-September romance type thing in the book. But like the Art and Judas contract, which is still one of the best runs in that thing, was so great. Again, the themes, I'll hammer this again because, again, along with X-Men, books were just doing, villain of the week or intergalactic threat. They weren't dealing with real. I mean, they'd occasionally have a very special episode, like certain sitcoms and stuff like that. But they went in on it. They went in on Speedy's drug use. They went in on Raven's depression. They went in on, I'm trying to think of another one. Even
Kid Flash had the self-confidence to quit.
Kid Flash had, Changeling had issues with Mento, his dad.
Tara's 15 and sleeping with Deathstroke.
And sleeping with Deathstroke. Yeah. So creepy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Something that you cannot get away with. And in
Yeah.
fact, they actively edit out that whole subplot within every time they do the
And they
Judas
put it
Priest.
in there to make Deathstroke a creep. I mean, really, they did. I mean, and how he was mentally grooming her and things like human trafficking. That was another one that they did as well. I mean, and this isn't a comic. It's still fun at times. It's still a superhero comic. It's still great. And Wolfman and Perez were just such a Perez on the Avengers and when he was on JLA, he feels like he's a gun for hire. When he's with Wolfman, they feel like a team.
Okay.
And that's what I always viewed it as, because, and also that's probably where I came in on the fandom as well. But I mean, I was going to tell you this before the show, and I decided to hold it for. I didn't realize he created the Taskmaster in the Avengers, which is one of my favorite characters prior to Civil War, where you know, I'm gonna go train a bunch of heroes. Okay, great, but him as a mercenary, I absolutely adored that character growing up. And you know, you forget, and of course the Slade, the Terminator look is such a great look for a character. I mean, just the half and half mask, and the way that he drew his movements and the fighting and stuff. I mean, it made him the baddest ass villain in the DC universe.
In a business where redesign is like critical, Slade has had essentially the exact same design since like 81, something like that. Like it's been 40 years and there has been minute changes to what the character looks like. It's like perfection
even
out
without
of
the
the
mask.
get-go.
Even without the mask, he looks like the
he's
most
awesome.
badass grandpa ever with the silver fox thing and the eye patch.
silver
He looks
patch.
awesome.
Yeah,
It's amazing that he's imitated and never duplicated, because Liefeld even used him as the model for Deadpool. If you look at it, Wade Wilson, Slade Wilson, it was a literal copycat of an assassin with excess powers.
And DC tried to do it with Prometheus as well. You know, everybody was trying to recopy the same formula, but no. I mean, even Taskmaster in some respect and Deathstroke are kind of the same character in some ways.
Well, they're designed like this. They're I think they're designed right around the same time, because he was actually he was doing some stuff on Avengers while he was drawing Teen Titans. So I mean, like his brain was certainly locked into a certain mode.
They wanted to do the same story with the
you got to double dip a couple of times to hit these deadlines. Okay, so moving on after that, he ended up going and leaving Titans in 1984 to go on and do the 12-issue maxi series Crisis, which is on record as being the first 12-issue as long series in history completed by the same creative team. It is a model that they try to emulate in comics nowadays, sometimes to success, but it does not work the way that they planned. You could argue that they created a monster by going with the maxi series concept.
That and the massive crossover issues, most of which had no bearing. It's like the Monitor appears and then it's like he's out, and it's like, that's why they called this a crossover issue. F that, man.
You slap that branding on the cover.
Oh yeah,
boom, increase sales 30%.
It was a cash grab for young Jeff, who wanted to see everything about this crisis, so he ended up buying things like the Legion of Superheroes, which I had no interest in whatsoever.
It worked so well that they've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
And like I said, to varying degrees of return. I just went to Free Comic Book Day yesterday. What did I pick up? Dark Crisis #1, or Dark Crisis Free Comic Book Day. Like it's 2020 or it's 2022, and we're still trying to drain every last bounce out of the crisis.
It is 2022, my friends, and I'm sure you're not aware of this, but the Justice League was just killed. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Do you know who killed them? None other than Pariah, created by George Perez in the 1985 Crisis.
Yeah,
I haven't read the book yet. Thanks for the heads up.
Sorry, like it happened. It happened back then.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. Like it's incredible how the imprint that book in particular has left on DC to the point where it's been almost 40 years and they haven't been able to shake it. Like
that's been Jeff Jones' editorial thing forever. I think, is to undo all the things he hated about the Crisis because they killed characters he liked. And that ticks me off because look, I love the Barry Allen Flash. The Rogues are my favorite group of characters ever. But Barry Allen was fine dead, and we were fine moving on to Wally West. And Wally West was an interesting character even though I hated the Speed Force for all it was, but it was, but Jeff Johns' main crutch when it comes to villains in the Justice League was always the crime syndicate. And then you're just like, I mean, we had like 4 different things. Every time there's a Justice League relaunch, they have to fight the crime effing syndicate. I'm like, their deaths were some of the most moving deaths ever. And we've cheapened it by continually bringing them back. Yeah.
That's what
Legion
we
of
do.
Doom, Crime Syndicate, Injustice Gang, all the groups. They're all coming through. Those are the legacies that he brought in, and people are not able to match the creativity. And it's amazing that we
do the Injustice Gang, didn't he?
Mhm.
all of them, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He's often imitated and has not been duplicated. And if we go through this list of his creative exploits, this is going to be the kind of thing that we just keep coming back to. So from 86 to 91, George Perez had committed himself almost entirely to the Wonder Woman line of comics, drawing about 2 years of it while writing 5 years of the comic. At the same time, the DC comic brand had gone through a creative and business overhaul, and so they were moving creators around to different books. At the same time, he was returning back to Titans, doing writing duties on that, as well as Superman, as they were navigating the events of the Crisis on Infinite Earths event that changed DC Comics. From then on, he had the War of the Gods crossover that was featured in Wonder Woman, and then the aforementioned Affinity Gauntlet that has been featured in the comics, and the cover that JD so mentioned earlier. That
Love it.
Eye-catching.
Yeah, that's a great cover. Let me backtrack for a second, though. War of the Gods is one of the worst crossovers that they ever did in DC. I mean, I hated Millennium because this is my prime comic collecting thing, and War of the Gods is right at the nadir of my comic collecting. That thing was such a mess, and they couldn't get it cleaned up in any of the things, especially, and they kept on like the Black Adam thing. Really, just it was. That issue of Suicide Squad made me angry when I read it. And I love John Ostrander, but he literally put himself in the book. It's like, as the writer, a villain who can see himself in the future, and then he gets writer's block and he gets killed. And you're just like,
I thought that was supposed to be Grant Morrison.
Oh no, you're right. It's Grant Morrison. It's Grant
Morrison.
Morrison. No, you're correct. You're correct. I'm sorry.
Ostrander has done that kind of gimmick before, but I'm not sure what the story.
No, you're
was.
correct. It was Grant Morrison. I was saying Grant Morrison kind of got him back in Animal Man a few times.
The Roadrunner.
Yeah.
So this is actually, you touched on an interesting point. It's around this time where Perez is starting to miss deadlines, having creative issues with editorial, and in the familiarity in the wrestling world, he starts to get labeled as difficult by coworkers and companies. And so he is no longer getting those plumb slate of jobs. Around this time, he ends up working for Eclipse Comics and Malibu Comics, working on characters that were either public domain or not interesting characters. And they weren't interesting to him either. So he was on a precipice of not even really being much in the comic industry because somebody decided that he was a problem. Around the same time, though, Marvel Comics was having a creative and financial disaster to its own company, and that's an
understatement, yes.
And they outsourced some of their main characters, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, to Image Comics, which was an independent company, in which they spent a year handling those characters, kind of a borrow, if you will. It wasn't received well. We can look right past that, because the point being, the next year, Marvel needed to lay out the red carpet and represent these characters in a way that wasn't going to completely torch them for the future. One of these presentations was George Perez returning to the Avengers after nearly 20 years. What began as a run with Kurt Busiek for, I believe, around 30 issues, then led to one of his early previous failures that he never got to make happen, which was Jla Avengers.
Right.
Jla Avengers was a project that he and Marv Wolfman were working on in 1985 at the cooperation of both Marvel and DC. It's something that had been done to tenuous degrees with single characters such as the Hulk and Batman, Superman and Spider-Man, so on and so forth. They were going to do the full group combination. JD, what do you got?
Ironically enough, X-Men and Teen Titans is the real big one, and Perez doesn't do the art on it.
Yeah.
Walt Simonson does the art on that book.
Which is also a beautiful book.
It's a good book. It's a great book. I can't
if
say
you
bad about
ever
it.
get a chance to read that book, it is probably one.
I haven't read that book actually. I never got a chance to. Who do they have as the baddies in that one then?
Darkseid and Dark Phoenix.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, they went intergalactic all the way through and all the crossovers. There you go.
They steered into it. It's Claremont. And it's my personal favorite. I haven't read it in a long time.
I believe at that time Marvel had the upper hand, so they got to dictate things like that. I mean, even though Marvel was in a tailspin, I mean, DC was this was a time when you had like 6 Spider-Man books and you'd put Wolverine in whatever other book you had, and then you'd put Batman in whatever DC book you had to get some sales in some way. I mean, I think they had, Batman and the Outsiders and Batman and this thing. Yeah, it was rough going by. Yeah, I believe. I remember reading somewhere that like Marvel pretty much had editorial control of the entire project, which is interesting because DC was had no. I mean, they were doing DC a favor at this time.
Yeah, no, it just. Marvel really wanted to make sure that everything that was happening was going to totally favor Marvel, which wasn't going to work. It ended up working in 2004, and they were able to cooperate, release 4 single issues, release a trade paperback, release a $100 hardcover, all under this agreement. It didn't last much longer than that, and it wasn't until about 6 months ago that they were, or 3 months ago, that they even like entertained going into business with each other for any reason whatsoever, which we'll go back to in just 1 second.
It's like you're talking 2004. Like these are two, like the early 2000s. They're really rebuilding still. Like the comic business is healthy again for the first time since the post boom, and we're not owned by giant conglomerates at this time. Like DC, like Warner owns DC, but they kind of like it, whatever. They don't pay nearly as much attention to the comic end of it as they would later on.
Yeah.
We were not in a world where every IP was getting bought up by a bigger company yet.
Is this also because my timeline's a bit off because I lapsed for a long time in comic? Is this the Amalgam?
This is
time period as well.
This is like a deck. This is like a good 6-7 years after Amalgam. Amalgam's like 97, 96, 97.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I believe he had participated a little bit in that, but there was more Dave Gibbons and Carl Kiesel and talents like that were doing that kind of stuff back then.
Thank you.
And there were 2 volumes of Amalgam. There was one edition, and then they went back. But you can't even find those comics anymore.
Those are guilty pleasures. I mean, they're not like amazing comics, but they're fun comics. Like I liked those books.
Yeah. So after that, Jla Avengers was kind of his opus, if you will. He went ahead and he did a couple other things. Cross-gen, he did a book called Sirens. And then in 2009, our favorite creator, Jeff Johns, tabbed him for a Crisis book, Legion of Three Worlds, which, while not what everybody wanted it to be, it was his last big group effort of doing a Legion book, which tied up the Avengers, the Justice League, and the Legion as the 3 large groups of heroes that he wanted to tackle in some way, shape, or form in his career and have an edition that had a lasting legacy of these were his signature stamps on these characters.
I read that book and I can't tell you what happened in it for the life of me.
They merged all the Legions into one and then undid it a few years later because timelines. Parallel worlds, my friend.
That's why we have this name. It's funny because like we talk about the Crisis, and I think that's basic. That's what's going to be associated with him forever is this magnificent Crisis. But DC has never been able to let it go because like they never really committed to the Crisis. Like it was so kind of half-ass. Like some things start over again, other things are continued.
Yeah.
Like Wonder Woman is a great example. Wonder Woman is brand new after the Crisis in continuity.
Yeah.
She just comes to man's world. Yet Wally West is the Flash.
Right. Batman is
unchanged. Tim Drake. Jason Todd has a new origin. That's it. Like that's the changes to Batman. Like it's like I said, it's in Superman. We get a brand new Superman origin. It's like so much, and this is like they continuously do this. Like they're never they're never like streamlined. So you constantly have to go back and do another crisis.
You're forgetting the Hawkman.
Well, Hawkman is the worst example of everything. Like,
dude, they've done so many reboots. Or Aquaman might be. Aquaman might be the worst in terms of the reboots and things like that.
Aquaman's close, but I mean, like that particular Hawkman, because the Truman Hawk World comes out.
Yeah,
people, this is great, and like it takes place now. Well, then who the hell was the Hawkman that was with the Justice League? That was a different Hawkman. I mean, it caused so many more problems. Like it should have been this clean slate, and it was the exact opposite.
The great irony of comic books right now is that DC spent so much time trying to clean up all these parallel worlds and things because they thought that readers would be able to jump on board with a fresh start and they would be able to follow these characters. And, we're going to phase out the World War II heroes and all these other things. Meanwhile, Marvel is now embracing the multiverse in so many ways. And you're just like, look at what these guys did, and they're fine with all the parallel universes and things like that. Why not just bring it back and just have everything back as it was?
And it is now, though, that we've done it twice, I think, in DC, where they brought back the multiverse in different ways. Like, it's hard to keep up sometimes. So it's like, it's nuts.
It's really interesting because George Perez, when you read these stories that he was involved with, you felt a sense of love and like reverence for these characters, even if they were going through a tragedy. But when I read the comics now, when they try and emulate what he does, I feel like they hate the characters.
I think that's fair.
I get
not hate.
I mean, they don't have that same reverence, and they don't go the extra length to remind the reader why you love these characters as you're going through that.
I agree with that. I think that a lot of like when you're writing, you want the character to battle through conflict. You want stakes that matter, so you try to do these things. But what you end up doing is you end up just piling garbage on top of it to the point where you're like, this is depressing to read. Because like I said, oftentimes this is going to be kind of corny, but superheroes have to be about hope, especially DC, right? Otherwise, you're just watching people be tortured for issues, which oftentimes will happen. Like we just had a couple years ago, we had Wally West become a serial killer, like stuff like that, because that happened.
What?
Yes,
it did.
That happened. It was a bad story, from a very good writer. So it's a shame.
He missed his family.
Yeah. So do I. Those were good stories. But that's the thing is you want to give these characters stuff to overcome. Yeah. But at the same time, if it's all about tragedy, then why are we reading these things? Because they become depressing after a while.
You also have the Daniel Bryan phenomenon where they're constantly just tearing these characters down, hoping that you're going to sympathize with them when they eventually have their small minor victory later on, not understanding like the stakes and the triumphs and the victories and the losses should be on an equal footing consistently in order to root for your hero.
Let me add this, because I was just scrolling to look at characters that George Perez had a hand in. And there's another one that I had forgotten completely about, but has been relevant of late. That's been good. He and Wolfman created the Adrian Chase Vigilante. Which wasn't but I mean the run on Vigilante, it's an interesting anti-hero book because he's an attorney who goes rogue and becomes an adventurer / killer, and at the end it's not a happy ending for Adrian Chase.
Kills himself.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we were just getting into the quote unquote cool KEWL, as I like to call it, when the Image people came in as just Spawn and Venom and all these people who kill, and the Punisher was getting that revamp of being we had all these anti-heroes and things like that, but to have a story like that ends with the main character killing himself and wrapping this entire thing up in a bleak way was just it was like, man, that's when you want bleak, you go to Wolfman and Perez and at times, but it's not for cheapness. It's not for, there's emotion there that's real, like I'm trying to remember the end of Vigilante, but you can tell that Chase is struggling with his issues before he does what he does, and you're just like, man, they've attempted that over and over again, but they did Andraco's run on Manhunter when he decided to revamp that, tried to do the same thing, wasn't the same.
You know, I get what you're saying, because so many times I think readers focus, or writers specifically, they focus on those moments, right? Is you want them to feel real and have these stakes, and so you embrace these, like, I don't want to say negative stories, but like these harsh endings, like you say, well, you can get away with that on a character like a vigilante. Whereas when you start bringing it to like Spider-Man and stuff like that all the time, you miss the points. Like that shouldn't be what, like, maybe with Batman you can do it because Batman's always been kind of like that. But I mean, when you bring it to other characters like Flash, right? Like, you know, Superman, it just becomes like, it's just negative stuff happening for the sake of negative stuff. Like,
and they do it for the shock effect.
It
more
is.
Than
it's all
anything.
shock effect. Absolutely.
And that was my issue with comics going into the mid to late 90s into the aughts, was just, we're going to revamp this character. How are we going to do this? We're going to kill a long-standing character that has a lot of history in the universe. If we're introducing a villain, we're gonna make him a badass villain. So he's gonna kill one of these B villains in the way, just in terms of a shock type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never really earned. Like, I remember the one that always comes to mind is when they were revamping Iron Man to Ironmonger. He kills Blacklash, who had a somewhat of a tragic backstory. I mean, he was trying to take care of his kid. He was trying to reform. He takes this job for money. And this crazy robot just slaughters him for no reason. You're just like, eh. And they just did for the shock value of it, because this was a character people liked to introduce this guy. And that you know, those always felt cheap. With Wolfman and Perez, it never felt cheap.
And even guys that are good, like a J.M. DeMatteis in his Spider-Man run, they create Kane, right? The evil Peter Parker clone. And we got to show how much of a badass Kane is. So, and I do like the Kane character. I think they've done some stuff, but this time when they're introducing him, what's he going to do? He's going to kill Dr. Octopus, right? It's the same thing.
There are characters like that I like. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love the original run on Scourge of the Underworld when he was going through Marvel, killing all these people, because it got over the fact that, oh, villains are in danger now. And it kind of has that Perez Wolfman effect too, because there are villains who are scared in that. And they're really, I mean, they're coming to Captain America going, I need protection, man. I am frightened by this. And I'm not usually freaked out by this because, you know, I'm a supervillain. Those are the types of just little things when you see emotion on a guy's face that Perez could really bring out in his art for me.
Was there anything that you felt Perez was weak at?
Again, I didn't like the Wonder Woman run as much as other people did, but I also don't, you know, I think when you're dealing with gods and things like that, it's almost too high of a stake at times. Don't get me wrong, the Crisis thing dealt with world destruction and things like that.
I think that I think a criticism that I've heard levied him is that with George Perez is George Perez, right? Like, he is what he is, and in an era where his style was no longer in vogue, but he was still a superstar, it almost kind of, that's, you know, part of it. When you talk about him doing stuff like Malibu and whatnot, you know, it's like, well, this guy's a pain in the butt, and his art isn't what it was 15 years ago. So I mean, I could see that being a negative. Like, I think he's really good at the big things, the big team ups. Like, I don't like the Wonder Woman stuff either, and I haven't read a lot of it because what I did read, I didn't like.
Yeah.
And so I think as a writer, I don't think he was super strong. Like, I think this is a case in the 80s too, a lot where, you know, when you're a good artist, you got some leeway, right? And everyone wants to tell their own stories, and not everyone should, you know. Like, most artists or most writers shouldn't draw, and a lot of artists really shouldn't write. And I think
I agree with that. And you also get married to your darlings. You can't kill your darlings after that. But I mean, and for me, it's, you know, in advertising, which I've dabbled in a bit, it's like the relationship between a copywriter and a art director type of thing. You have that working relationship where, okay, here's the type of character I want. Put it on paper, and he could do that, and that was great. I agree. I think the stuff he wrote showed a certain type of weakness there. But I want to bring up something that doesn't, because I agree with you that the splash pages he does are fantastic. They're just absolutely fantastic. I think he doesn't get enough credit for quiet moments.
I agree with that.
That's characters on there.
And that's why I wasn't going to say that, because he is good at that, but that's not what he's known for. But I think that's an underrated skill of his. And where, you know, the superstars of the 90s, that's what they did, was the big splash moments, but they were really terrible at the human moments,
Yes.
right? Because that's why we read comics, right? You read it for the characters, for like the soap opera aspects. It's why do you keep coming back? Because you love the characters. Wolfman and Perez and Titans is the best example. But like we lost that somewhere along the line. And I think it took a while for artists to kind of get that back, to being able to do a quiet moment.
One of the things that I miss about the type of storytelling that they would do back then is that they would keep stories perpetually stacking on top of each other instead of doing the decompressed, you're 6 issues and you're done, go straight to trade and move on to the next thing. You would have subplots that would nag at you throughout these stories as other active elements are going on through, and you'd be reminded here or there. And when you're reading this at a monthly thing, you have to think about the fact that you might get a panel with some dialogue 1 month. 2 months later, you might get a couple more panels of dialogue, and you're getting that slow tease and burn that wrestling fans are familiar with as well. If you're waiting for these things to go into overdrive, he was a master of those quiet moments, making you anticipate the doom or the glee that would be coming as a result.
You know, Denny O'Neil talks about this in his book on how to write comics, is that he really goes into, Paul Levitz created this paradigm. They actually had when he was editing Batman, they had to call it the Levitz Paradigm, is you have your 3 stories. You have your A, your B, and your C, right? And eventually your A plot gets solved. Your B plot becomes an A plot. Your C plot becomes the B plot, and then you introduce a new story that becomes the C plot, and you keep rotating through that. So that is literally was like the foundation of how you can see a lot of it in Claremont. He's a great example of balancing those, of building up a story over the course of months and sometimes years. Sometimes he's introducing stuff that he forgets about years later, and you're like, what happened to that? And he's like, oh, I don't remember that, But they did it. Wolfman, I think, does a better job staying focused on that kind of stuff as it goes along. Like the Titans is a much more streamlined run, I think, than what Claremont did in some of those X-Men. But yeah, that was on purpose. That was what they were telling him to do back then.
That's awesome.
I'm remembering a couple moments in Crisis where this is another thing I love about just the way he stages things on pages, is the threat that's off panel makes its appearance known in such a way, like when Simon is trying to run the villain meeting and he gets his brain blown off from off panel. When in issue number 9, when it's Mirror Master, Icicle, and this swords guy who I can't remember his name. I don't even remember what the villain is, but they're at the birth of the multiverse, where Krona is, and they're bickering over who gets to destroy the machine, and then all of a sudden he just kills all 3 of them, which shocked a young Jeff Hawkins, because Jeff really liked the Sam Scudder Mirror Master quite a lot. But just the finality of, that building of tension, like you were saying, but at the same time, the guy who's building has no idea of the threat that's coming to him at the same time. And when it's revealed, just the way, I have Simon getting his brain blown off in such ingrained in my mind right now, because it's such a perfect shot. And then Luthor and Brainiac reveal that we're in charge now. And you're like, oh, holy crap, there it is, man.
So they did a really interesting strategy with Crisis, in which in the first issue, one of the main villains kidnaps the Flash and proceeds to psychologically torture him for 8 issues. It just goes back and forth. He's using his power to scare and get the Flash to do his bidding. It ends in issue 8 with the Flash heroically overcoming this and destroying the machine he's been forced to build. And all the quiet moments that led up to it led to the gut punch of no one realizing that, consequentially, this guy just died. He is dead. A guy that had been a character for 30 years in existence, brought in 1956, and then in the Crisis, they come to the next issue, and nobody knows until the cover comes out. There's an image of Superman holding Supergirl dead. They win a 1-2 punch of killing 2 beloved superheroes because they weren't expecting that you would think that they would do it 1-2 back to back.
Because he didn't do it back then, right?
No.
Especially Barry Allen's the linchpin of the Silver Age, right? He's the guy that the issue showcase comes up, boom, Silver Age of comics. You know, he's the guy that jump starts it, and like it's such a poetic moment because he essentially becomes like the patron saint of the DC universe after that, and you lose so much. Like that death meant so much to not just Wally but to the entire universe. It was such a big foundational moment. Same with Supergirl, and I like Supergirl, and I think they've done okay things with her, but there's this great moment that comes later where she's like this ghost, right? And she like nobody remembers who she is. And I forget what book it was, but like there's a story where Supergirl is basically like the ghost of Christmas present or Christmas past, and like she's like she says, I don't exist anymore, and she disappears. And it was like it's such like talk about a gut punch. I wish I can remember off the top of my head. I just thought it's off the top of my head, but I mean like you lose so much of those things. And again, that stuff works because of George Perez. How many times did we see the callbacks to Barry's costume like dissipating and becoming nothing? Like that became like a foundational image in comics for a generation.
Yeah, him disintegrating like that over panels.
Yeah,
and you're just like, oh my god. I mean, it wasn't just one thing and he's dead,
which is what most artists would do. They make that one big thing.
It's
what was
slow,
fantastic.
and he's remembering Iris and stuff. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
He has the panels in increasing size. They're squares and they're slightly bigger, one cascading one on top of each other as if a running pattern until you get to the final four and they spread out because they're going so fast, and you're able to clearly see his face. And his face is full in the first panel, and then it's gaunt in the second panel, and then it's skeletal in the third panel, and then it's nearly dust in the fourth panel, and then the fifth panel, the costume just falls to the ground.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that, and I'll give you another thing that just because Crisis now is in my head so much. He does the action shots in the flips, but with the character of the Roger Hayden Psycho Pirate, where you see his head is big in there, and you see the eyes bulging and the look of terror in his face as to what he has to do. Because he's under control of the antimatter and things like that. He has to use his power to scare an entire universe. And he's internalized that, and you can see it like I think there's like even like little glints of reflection in the pupils of the eyes, because they do it's such a great close-up of his face and this look of I have to do what type of thing. And you're just like, oh my God, this is a man who is also being psychologically tortured at the same time as Barry is also.
So let me ask you, I'm gonna start first here, but I'm gonna ask you guys to think about a couple of the favorite moments that George Perez brought for you, and your favorite character that he created. So I get
a list here.
I will come back to you, or favorite character that he portrayed, or that your favorite George Perez version of the character, whatnot. So the one that I think of when I think of George Perez that most people don't is in his 2000 run of Avengers. It is the Ultron Unlimited storyline. And he has Ultron with an army of Ultrons, much like the Avengers 2 movie. They took a lot from that story, but they missed the one line that I was really hoping that they would have. And Ultron has defeated the Avengers. He's got them all knocked down. He thinks he's got the upper hand. And one of the Avengers manages to bide enough time until they all recover. And then all of a sudden, you see the Avengers in a panel, and Thor,
the Thor line,
broken and beaten up, just calmly says, Ultron, we would have worked with thee.
It's a great line.
And it's just the moment of quiet. Just they're all ready. They're all mad. They're all ready to like put him down. And the concrete just stature of these heroes as they're ready to take him down one more time just sits with me every time I think about an iconic George Perez moment. JD, what do you got?
So the iconic moment for me is always going to be the death of Barry Allen. I discovered DC Comics outside of Batman through the John Wesley Shipp Flash show, right? So
Nice.
that to me is my that's my tether into this world. And when I first bought the Flash, I discovered it's not the same guy, right? Which a lot of people would say, well, that's a problem. But for me, I got to kind of grow with Wally by having this, this show about Barry to come in. And when I get there, Wally's long been the Flash, and it's the end of the Mike Baron run. So I mean, like, he's already been established, and we're coming in, and I get to learn and see this stuff after the fact. And I love Wally. Wally was my favorite character for a long time in the books. And like that moment to me helps define growing up, right? Growing, like you're changing. Wally is one of the few characters who got to become the next version of the character. He, Kid Flash becomes the Flash. And it's such a perfect thing. And it tethers back to, New Teen Titans, which again, I read later on. But for me, that moment of Barry's death defining what happens with Wally. And for me, it's always, I have that image burned into my brain because of what it meant for Wally specifically, and then the DC later on so much. And as far as character, man, I love Cyborg. I just love Cyborg. And now that my little boy loves Teen Titans Go, it's his favorite show, and just seeing the Wolfman Perez creations interpreted in such a silly way that he adores, and seeing Cyborg, who again I discovered on Challenge of the Super Friends.
Nice.
Right? That was my first experience to Cyborg. So when I see the New Teen Titans comic book, my eye is drawn right to Cyborg. I know that guy, right? I know him. So that was, for me, that Cyborg is special.
JD or Jeff, sorry. What are your thoughts?
I'm gonna try and temper, because a lot of my things are deaths, because I think Perez did them so well. But like the death of Terra, the death of Barry Allen is one. The death of Ultraman in Crisis 1 to open things, where he's just gonna fly into this.
He becomes Superman.
Yes. It was so, and there's that knowing little grin right before he does it. And it's so powerful to me. But I'll give a happy moment too. The reintroduction, or the introduction of the Ted Cord Blue Beetle into the DC universe. And hey, we've acquired these characters and we're not gonna let Alan Moore use them. Kind of thing. The Crisis 7 cover is just so iconic. And just those any funeral scenes that he ever did, just if you're not weeping, it kills you. Favorite character, I think I've already mentioned, I love the Taskmaster, and I do love Slade as well, but I'm a villains guy. So I love villains. I think he also created Cannon and Saber, who are a couple of my favorite B villains, who were I think they're one of the first openly gay supervillain couples in comics to be portrayed at that. The guy named Cannon was the guy with the swords, and the guy named Saber was the guy with the guns. It was just one of those things that they just decided to do. But I like B villains like that a lot. So that's where I go for. And I'd say Taskmaster and Slade of the characters. Ain't any of those that run of Titans you could name, because he just did Cyborg, Raven, Starfire, of course. Any of those would be great picks as well.
I forgot to tell you mine, which you kind of brought right back into. My favorite character that he created is Nightwing.
He did. He created
That's
Nightwing.
Right. Yeah.
He created the new version of the original Robin, Dick Grayson, who is now known worldwide around the universe as the greatest hero known as Nightwing.
You know who will agree with you? One Scott Young.
I know he will.
It's his all-time favorite superhero.
We don't talk about it, but I've been meaning to tell him I love Nightwing.
It's fun because there's this big meme on social media with Nightwing's butt, and I can just get a rise out of him every opportunity I can, because he named his son after Dick Grayson. So I mean that's fun. But you say that.
Let me ask you this about that character. Do you think that they've really dropped the ball on not actually making him the Batman? I mean, we've had other Green Lanterns, we've had other Flashes, but we've never had another Batman.
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. I don't think he should ever be Batman.
You're passionate about this. Go for it. Let me hear it.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
Dick Grayson does not have the pathos that Batman has. What drives Batman is a need to not see people get hurt. Dick Grayson doesn't want people to get hurt, and he will go to great lengths to save people in a way that does not have the self-destruction that Batman has. I have long since held that Dick Grayson has an internal hope system inside him that Batman does not have. And if he were to try and be Batman, he would fail. He needs to be his own hero. There are other heroes, perhaps Tim Drake would be a good Batman down the line. I don't think Jason Todd would be. Damian Wayne is probably the likeliest one. But for me, Dick Grayson was the first hero to graduate out of the shadow of his mentor, and he should never take that mantle.
I like what you got to say. There is that run with Grant Morrison in 2009 where he becomes Batman, and it's when Damian first becomes Robin. And
it's not even the first time.
No, it isn't the first time, because the first time was after Nightfall. But again, this is like after the RIP stuff, which I love that. I love the whole Grant Morrison Batman arc. Fantastic stuff. And I like the plan, because Batman for the first time isn't the dark one in the relationship. Like, you've got a Robin who's a little off kilter, right? And Morrison is so good at playing with the trope and playing with the different characters, because he actually brings in so much into the Batman universe that they really feel like different characters. But what makes it work is that it can't last. Right. And I agree with you on that. I like that Dick Grayson could have been a horrible human being, but he was, Batman kind of saves him. It's actually the one thing Batman actually does right, because people are always down on Batman as like, he puts these teenagers in danger, but Dick Grayson could easily be a villain. But like, I like how you point that his internal hope system keeps him in balance. And like, you don't get like Nightwing's not as dark as Batman, right? He can't be.
I'll push back a little, because I do think Wally West stepped out of the shadows for quite a while.
But not until after.
Yeah, like, Dick does it first. Yeah.
Right.
What happened was, in the Titans, Wally West retired the issue before the Judas contract. So that writes him out of the whole thing. In the Judas contract, that is where Dick Grayson decides, I don't want to be Robin anymore. So everyone thinks he's retired from superheroing, and then he's kind of left off the grid in the hunt for whatever, kind of falls off the radar. And then he returns as Nightwing. He's got a sick disco outfit, and the legend begins.
In 1984, he has this sick disco outfit. Yeah, it's cool. And I like too that he took the name of a Superman character, right? That's something from the Superman mythos.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've always appreciated that Nightwing has literally has a little bit of Superman in him, and he's not just Batman.
Yeah,
but I think Wally. I was agreeing with you, Jeff. I agree. Wally succeeds where no other sidekick has. Is he becomes the hero and arguably does a better job at being the hero.
And as much I don't like Mark Waid's run on Flash. I'm one of the because I'm a rogues guy. I'm a rogues guy. So, and he just said I'm not going to use the rogues. But and at the time I hated it, but and also I hate him for Underworld Unleashed. But in the end he became they're two different characters to me, because Wally's whole thing is Speed Force and stuff like that, and Barry's is basically his dead wife drives him about all these other things. I was gonna bring up another character on that cover before I know we want to wrap this up, but
keep going.
Jericho is an intriguing character to me. Always has been. And I don't know about you guys. I hated when they turned him bad. I get why they did it, but that's another theme in the Titans books of Wolfman and Perez has so great is the relationship between fathers and father figures and their children. Because you have Changeling and I want to Mento. That's correct. The Steve, the guy from the Doom Patrol. Yeah. And you have Jericho and of course Slade, and you have Dick and Bruce, and and they're all dealing with these things.
Raven and Trigon.
Yeah. Starfire and her overbearing parents.
Edie and Oliver.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Cyborg and his father. Yeah. So I mean that's another and you see all the teen angst in the book. I mean, it comes out in the art too, where they don't know anything. They're just trying to be good superheroes, and they're screwing up occasionally, and they're, Speedy's shooting smack in.
I mean, you got teenagers fighting people named Brother Blood in a temple of Death Cult, and you're just like, oh, this is normal.
What I love about this, and I'll tell you, because I work with kids. I'm a high school wrestling coach, right? And I get to work with a lot of very exceptional young men who some of them are blessed with gifts beyond what they can handle at the age, right? So I really like the Wolfman Perez run because it feels like teenagers, right? Like as a coach, I see this. Like I see these kids that have more talent than they know what to do with, and they should be going in this direction, but everything else is distracting them because they're normal teenagers. And I think they do a really good job of capturing the essence of what it's like to be a blessed teenager.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was the comics industry as a whole used Wolfman, Claremont, Perez, Byrne to tap into a teenage vibe that they've kind of tried to cultivate and live off of for years, even though their audiences have perpetually gotten older. They're still chasing that teenage market in a way, but they don't know how. So,
and they never got it right with subsequent teams. Like even the New Mutants never really got to the level of, say, the Kitty Pryde Colossus X-Men that run had and things like that. They try and recreate it with different people and different things. It never quite hits like those do.
I think off the top of my head, there were at least 5 reboots of the Titans up till now that were made and eventually just failed because the magic of the creators that originally brought it to the table just could not be recreated.
I'll give you another example within that same team is the Hank Hall, Don Hall thing when Don dies in the Crisis and Hank is just a wreck. And of course, eventually they retcon his stuff too. But I mean, he's angry at the world and he's going to take it out on people because he doesn't have that influence to calm him down until they get to the Don Granger stuff, which I didn't do it for me, but I understand people who love that run. But I always thought Hank and Don Hall were a great couple of characters, even though he didn't create them. But just watching Dove die in the Crisis and watching Hank helpless to help him at all,
and not have anything to fight in order to stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Not have anything to fight.
Didn't they eventually make him a villain? Wasn't he the Monarch?
It was originally Hal, and then they turned it into Hank Hall.
Yeah.
Which was ridiculous.
DC Comics.
Because again, a certain editorial guy really liked Hal.
Zero Hour.
Yeah.
If there should be a game where we just list all the crossover names and throw a few fake ones in there to see if people will guess which ones are the fake ones.
Oh, eventually it's going to get all of them because they keep doing them every year. We get these giant crossovers for the last 35 years. You'll be able to
name the new ones. I can only name the old ones. I could go Crisis, Legends, Millennium, 0 Hour,
Final Night,
War of the Gods.
I like Final Night.
Final Night was I liked Final Night because I like any story that brings back armies of the dead and all these dead villains I used to like. When the Avengers had to do that against the Grandmaster, I always love that shit too. Let's see what other one.
You got Millennium?
I got Millennium. Oh God, Millennium started out interesting and then just came suck. Because the Manhunters are such a weird, cool crew. Those are like the first 5 crossovers that they did have. Final Crisis, Identity Crisis,
Infinite Crisis,
Crisis
to Infinitum.
what was the name of the one where they put everybody on the prison planet for a while? That miniseries that eventually went.
That was the part of Countdown to Final Crisis. I remember that.
Yeah,
that was with Trickster and was it Trickster and Piper?
Trickster and Piper are being chased by the Suicide Squad and a bunch of other things. And
I will say, I have a small bit of love in my heart for DC 1 Million.
Okay,
dude, there's some interesting concepts in DC 1 Million. Like, I got a soft spot for anything Grant Morrison influenced, so I actually do like some of DC 1 Million.
I liked Identity Crisis up until the reveal.
Ooh, yeah. It was going in a good direction, because then it didn't.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share regarding what you feel about George Perez?
Yeah, we gotta get back on track. Again, look, every artist goes through their career wanting something as resonant and as famous as something like Crisis on Infinite Earths. But that run on Titans is still talked about as something legendary, and his art on Avengers, and and elsewhere. I mean, it's a shame he didn't get a lot of later work in his life, to be honest with you. Because when the sickness started, and of course he couldn't, really go as he was. I mean, that's the thing, is when you have great runs and you want to see another great run out of a creator and they don't get that chance. I mean, I feel the same way. Was talking about this before. Like Ostrander, once Kim Yale died, was just pretty much done as a writer for the most part for me. I mean, he had some flashes in there, and there were some runs there, but he never had that edge type of thing. But his artwork, it's pretty. That's the thing. His artwork is so pretty, and I think JD said with the emotional resonance as well. And you just look at it and you go, wow. I mean, I love the guy.
The way he's able to balance the big bombastic moments of comics that we all love, right? And the things that we remember, and then the ability to do the quiet human touches, which is hard, right? You talk to an artist, it's much harder to convey emotion, right? He did that. He balanced it so well, right? And he was the biggest superstar in comics for a time. And, he's just from a different era, man. Like if he's 10 years younger, maybe he's part of that image revolution and, doing those things, but he's not. So he's in that generation before, and it didn't really, I don't know if people ever really held him in the same, they do, but I mean, like he never got that superstar status that like Rob Liefeld did, right?
Or Byrne even.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. Like he never really had that. And like you said, like when it was pretty much like after Wonder Woman, like it just wasn't the same.
After he showed weakness as a writer,
yeah,
they almost like lost faith in him as a creator in some ways, which is just odd because it's like, well, why don't you just go back to his strength then?
Mm-hmm.
But by then, again, I think, yeah, it was just the next generation had come in. They're doing all their little cool
gimmicks,
dark. Everybody's dressing in black and killing people and things like that, and it was just a new era of comics, and he was one of the last people standing in that old era of to the point where he actually had to do vigilante to kind of be in that kind of talk. So yeah, he's in that weird in between with like the Roy Thomas and the Marv Wolfman and Denny O'Neil and all those guys. I think he should be put in that class at the same time.
I agree. And it's sad that like when someone goes, you can kind of, because we just lost Neil Adams, right? And Neil Adams was this giant lion in the comics book industry, this champion of creator rights, this guy with this big, bold personality who wasn't afraid to tell anyone to stick it. And he would just do his own thing constantly. And, and George Perez was very much different, very soft-spoken, very much beloved, and it's just different.
I think the next artist that is going to have this kind of effect, and God hope it's not for years and years to come, might be like Bill Sienkiewicz.
I could see that, yeah.
In some ways.
Mm-hmm.
John Byrne.
John Byrne. John Byrne's going to be a fun conversation.
That could be the best of the best and the worst of the worst.
Man, there's going to be some great conversation. I'm not saying I'm looking forward to someone dying, but I mean, like when John Byrne dies, there will be so many crazy think pieces and people who knew him come out to say things, because that is another guy who has thoughts.
Yes.
And isn't afraid to share them.
So I will wrap this up by telling you that George Perez, as a human being as well, was beloved by everybody who came past him. I had the honor of meeting him a couple of times, and the thing that I would remember most about him was that he made time for everyone.
That's what I heard.
It didn't matter if he was at a booth just doing signing casually. He would stop and he would talk to you, and he would make you feel like the most important person in the world when you were talking about work that you did with him, because he was so appreciative of the people who bought, loved, read, and respected his work. And he is on record saying that one of his main inspirations was Jack Kirby, and he never forgot the kindness Jack Kirby gave towards him. And so he had an entire generation of artists that tried to emulate what he did, most notably Phil Jimenez.
Yeah.
And he is now in the elder statesman role, and he is a perfect candidate for this, of continuing the legacy of kindness and empathy towards an audience that want to love the work of a creator. That's lost nowadays, where, you know, people behave in a way where, you know, they forget the internet exists and don't have a human element talking to each other. And when you have someone who is as gifted and talented as George Perez was, and to then act as humble and sincere and caring, that just makes for an amazing human being. And there won't be anyone that will ever match the contributions that he made to the comic book industry. And I personally am glad I was able to thank him for that.
Well said, man.
That was
So,
great. Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap this up. JD, Jeff, I want to thank you both for coming. Do you guys want to get your plugs in, Jeff?
I'm mostly just crack wise about wrestling at Crap Game 13, but also on the Fight Game Media Patreon. I am part of the Dynamite Show every Wednesday with Paul Fontaine, breaking down the minutia of every segment of Dynamite. I also do a show on the Voices of Wrestling Network called Shake Them Ropes, kind of a lighthearted, snarky look at all the news and events of stateside wrestling.
I host a comics culture podcast, more movies and film, or more movies than actual comics, called Superhero Speak. I also crack wise at JD_Oliva at Twitter. And we have a podcast called Brace for Impact. That's on both the Patreon and the free feeds of the Fight Gaming Network with my partner, Mike Gilbert. We talk about Impact Wrestling, which is always fun. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Depends on the week, but we always have a good time talking about it. And I'm a writer, and my day job, I just finished a Kickstarter for my last series of books that went really well. Happy for that. So yeah, best place to find me is on Twitter.
Congratulations on your Kickstarter
Thanks.
again.
Yeah.
Thanks for the help, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
You can find me at Jer Finestone on Twitter and on future episodes of Parallel Worlds. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.